Welcome back. Nice to have you with us. Still with me in the studio, Omri van Sail, who's leader of the agribusiness unit at Deloitte, and joining us from our bureau in Cape Town, Gareth Lloyd-Jones, the MD of EcoWise. We're talking about food security. Gareth, let me just come back to you. Surely it's simple. You look at a country, let's take South Africa, and we say, how much maize do we need? And you go to the farmers and you say, we need to plant that much maize because that's what we need. Surely it's that simple.
Well, look, I mean, it isn't that simple in the sense that there's a lot of pressure on governments not to hoard their maize and to release it into the open market and then let everyone purchase it at the prevailing maize price that exists. So it's not a question of just holding on to everything and saying, let's use it for our own needs and keep the price as it is. And it is a delicate balance between how much do we keep and how much do we release into the, or are we obliged to release into the open market for, for purchase.
Omri, I'm still not seeing this. Am I just being too autocratic here and looking after my little world?
Yes, Jeremy, you've clearly not consulted in agriculture for very long.
Okay. Right, fine. Okay.
No, there's a lot of social dynamics as well that one needs to consider when one works in the industry. But I think that, the basic principle is if you look after your farmers, they'll look after you. And that's why countries like Zambia, they've opened the gates and guys are coming in there, and you can see the difference in their agricultural outputs, and it's remarkable. The same with countries like Mozambique, because in South Africa we've got the skills. So what guys are doing is they're saying, and in Zimbabwe the skills were there, a lot of those farmers have gone up to Zambia, but they're saying, come in. The gates are open. Come and farm for us.
There are a fair amount of countries in Africa that are opening their arms to farmers who have the skills. I mean, I'd say it without prejudice. I think some of the most skilled farmers in Africa were, because of the nature of how they had to exist, were the Zimbabwean farmers who have spread out through, as you say, Zambia, Tanzania, DRC, they're all over Africa, and they're growing huge amounts of crops. And I suppose it does come back to what you were talking about originally, is that skill and passing on the skills.
You see, Jeremy, I think that the only way to really make it sustainable, otherwise it would have been already, because agriculture was part of the history of this continent for a long time. But the only way to ramp it up, like we should be able to, and to alleviate poverty at the levels that we need on this continent, is to do it on a commercial basis. I firmly believe that, because if you don't do that on a commercial basis, people don't get challenged to evolve themselves in that specific area. And I think as a continent, that is probably one of our biggest challenges, is actually to get us to that point.
Gareth, just to, as an aside here, I do some work for an NGO called Stop Hunger Now, and one of the things that has always struck me is the lack of vegetable gardens in your rural areas. It doesn't seem to be part of a culture that we have, and I'm talking specifically about South Africa now, because I have seen that culture in other Southern African countries when I've traveled through them.
Well, I think what we've got to seriously safeguard ourselves from is doing like a jump over the sort of natural course of your revolutions of your economic development cycle. So I think what's key is that people do need to go through a proper agrarian revolution, and I'm not sure if that's has actually happened effectively, creating that culture across the continent and in South Africa. So I think the emphasis on skills, as we've been mentioned previously, and the emphasis on what do we actually require as a country and how we're going to get there from an agricultural sector point of view, I think really needs to be addressed at the lowest possible level in our country and in our continent.
Omri, in your opinion, is government doing enough about this? Is there enough urgency being channeled into this? Because it could potentially become a flashpoint which, from a government point of view, could topple a government. I mean, food rights have done that in the past, in history.
I've seen some activity in government. I do some work for the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform and for the Department of Agriculture, minimal work. But there was a zero hunger initiative that has come up. that the government is trying to drive and push through. So the challenge as well is a lot of this has to happen at municipal level. And the municipalities are experiencing some severe constraints at the moment in executing on their mandates. And I think that creates a lot of ripple effects in communities. So if you're talking about zero hunger, you're talking about supply of water, you're talking about upping skills, creating some small business enterprises. And it was very interesting. A friend of mine lives in Kimberley in a township, and I went to visit him 2 months ago. And he has a tap, he has water, but there's no vegetable garden. He doesn't really know how to plant a vegetable garden. So I explained to him how to do it, and he started doing it now. And there's so much positive that can come out of that. If you just think that the nutrients and the vitamins they get from the fresh produce and, you know, all of that. At the moment, you know, they eat starch, a lot of starch. So, you know, they don't get all the other stuff in, and their kids don't get it in. So, but again, it needs to be a focused and concerted effort. You have to actually execute on a plan at a rural level to actually make that happen.
Okay, Gareth, do you think we'll ever get this right?
Well, I think if you look at other industries, I think you'll see that we actually as a country can get it right. And I refer to an industry like, for example, the motor industry, where there was a plan of action called the Motor Industry Development Plan, where they literally identified all the relevant links within that supply chain. They created a whole infrastructure from component parts all the way through to the end product that was manufactured in this country. It created jobs, it created communities, it created a whole host of other sort of ancillary stuff that took place. And to a point where we became an exporter of our motor vehicles. And I think that is the kind of approach that's required to focus at the segmented segments of the agriculture, you know, be it the protein sector or be it the fruit sector, and say, let's understand the links, you know, within that supply chain. Let's understand the commercial viability of it, the environmental sustainability of those links. Let's develop those links from the grassroots, the ground up, from the rural up, include those people into that structure, and create a sustainable secure food supply chain going forward. I mean, and we've done it before, and I believe we can do it, but it really does take a change. It's going to need to take a mindset shift away from the political agenda back to the economic agenda in terms of what's right for this continent, this country.
Omri, you raised Zambia as an example. Are the SADC countries or the African countries looking at this problem or possible problem holistically, or is there no marriage of conversation here around it?
It's interesting that you asked that question, Jeremy. I was about a month ago, I attended a strategy session that NEPAD had, where commercial agriculture, some representatives of countries, every country that belongs to NEPAD, or a lot of these countries come up with an investment plan now in agriculture. So there is a bit of coordination with regards to the planning, and I think one of the big challenges in the continent is executing on these plans, because there are plans, but they're not being executed well. And then also to make sure when you execute these plans, to do it in a economically and environmentally sustainable manner, I think is also a challenge. So there are initiatives, but I don't think there's enough money and expertise that sits behind them to actually make a big impact.
Gareth, I'll throw this at you. You both seem to be painting a little bit of a bleak picture here, to be honest. Are you looking at it from a bleak point of view?
I think, you know, I honestly believe that the risk is imminent in terms of how, you know, in terms of what could happen, and I believe it's real. And it is relatively bleak, especially opposite the consumer for now. And it's bleak opposite the fact that we haven't really started to do anything significant about the situation. Again, you know, in terms of execution, I think one does need to, you know, go back to the old cliche of private sector, public sector partnerships, because funding is obviously the issue, investment is the issue, but then those commercial private sector entities that are going to start funding need to get some sort of ROI on the funding that they give. So there needs to be a give and a take in terms of how does one stimulate those industries and make it viable for them to operate in the economy, but at the same time get them to invest and to help execute in terms of the grassroots development that need to take place. So, you know, that's going to be one of the key success factors here, and to get the private sector, public sector partnership on the table, and get it working. Otherwise, I believe that there are going to be significant issues going forward.
Gareth, thank you very much for your time. That's where we will leave it with you. I just want to cross for a last question to Omri. We given Reserve Bank stats of inflation between sort of 3 and 6%, and they say they'll be able to maintain it there. But what I'm hearing here with maize prices and soybean prices and all the rest of it, when we look at the bottom end of the scale, the people, the poorest people, food inflation, in my mind, this is just saying to me, food inflation is going to be way up, and those people are going to be struggling. If your maize price is 50% up, your bread price is going to have to increase. And as you say, that's the staple of most of the continent. Where are food inflation prices going here?
That's, you know, Jeremy, that is one of the risks. You know, there were 2008. There were riots about food because rural people cannot afford a 50% price increase on their basic staples.
Yeah.
So that's a real risk. I think in South Africa we've buffered the risk to an extent, because we are to a large extent self-sufficient. But other countries like Nigeria, for example, is a net importer of a lot of these things. Cassava, they produce themselves there. Kenya, East Africa, so these countries would be vulnerable. It also depends, these things work in swings and roundabouts. You know, next year might be a very good crop year for America, so that could kind of buffer it. But just to get back to your bleak picture statement, what I'm seeing consulting for a lot of international companies that want to come and invest in Africa. Africa currently is the flavor of the month. The world has seen, we have 65% of the world's arable land in Africa, and we have water.
But the thing is, we need the skills, we need the investment, and we're the flavor of the month. Yeah. We need to start growing stuff that gives people flavor as well.
Yeah, yeah. And if we don't get that right, and Asia is moving into this continent at a lightning pace, because they realize to feed Asia going forward, they need a vegetable patch.
Yeah, and we're the vegetable patch.
We are, and they move slow. You know, they execute to a plan.
Yeah.
So if we don't wake up to the realities of, you know, when I did my first interview, the guy said to me, everything in Africa is edible. If you don't eat it, it will eat you. And if we don't realize that this is a competitive global environment that we work in and that we function in, and that we need to up our game,
we'll lose it. We'll wake up when the last shopping trolley's been pushed off to China.
Yes.
That's where we're going to have to leave it. Omri, thank you very much for your time. Gareth, thank you for yours, and thank you for your time. We'll catch you next time around. Nice having you with us. Bye-bye.